Welcome to the Family Pictures Podcast with a 2025 addendum to the hot summer family pictures horror. But first, I'm Michael Branson Smith, and I'm here with
Summer 70s.
Hot Summer 70s, but 2025 edition, Jim.
Yeah, but you've got the 70s.
But it's not the 70s anymore. It's 2025.
No, fair enough. I'm Jim Groom.
Yeah, and we're doing weapons. This is kind of almost like an emergency podcast for us.
Exactly. Hold the presses.
We had done this 5-episode arc of interrogating 70s horror and family portraits of that. And I'm not going to review the films right now, but we really enjoyed that process, and it's starting to make me actually like horror. But I'll have to say, Zach Kreger, who put out this movie this summer, is suddenly a phenom, in the horror business. He's an interesting person. He came from sketch comedy. He had actually started a troupe with a friend called The Whitest Kids You Know, and it was developed into a TV show that lasted 5 seasons on the IFC channel back when cable was still a thing, but that's no longer a thing. So he was this comedy troupe writer turned horror auteur. And I say horror auteur not lightly, because this film has like a Jordan Peele kind of feel. It has like an even Stanley Kubrick kind of feel, like the thoughtfulness and the portraits of characters in the building of a world that is very complete and mysterious and not holding your hand at the same time. It's not explained. And there's so many things I think we're going to get into in that context. And, there was a great podcast. He had 2 friends. He did a podcast. It's called The Podcast on the Left. It's some other comedy people that he was adjacent to a number of years back. And they were interrogating the idea. I was like, why does a comedy writer make a good horror film creator?
Yeah, which is a good question, actually. And I like that idea of it depends upon the same visceral reaction they were talking about, whether it's timing with comedy or timing with horror. And there is something to that. And one of the things that Kreger said, and I just as a quick note, I watched this on recommendation from our sysadmin at Reclaim Hosting, the hosting company I help run, Chris Blankenship, who's like, this is the movie I've been waiting for. This is huge. And he's like, of a different generation than me. And he's like, if you like horror, you got to see it. And then you had mentioned Barbarians in one of our podcasts, and I had not seen that. And so I was like, who is this? Who is this new kind of up and coming horror director? And so it happened to be playing an original language in Italy, where I live. And it was a full theater. And I go in, and my 2 sons are with me. And I just was blown away. And I went back, told my sysadmin he was awesome. And then I called you up, and I was like, Michael, we have to watch this thing, because it kind of, for me, parallels a lot of the discussions we were having about horror and social anxiety in the 70s. And I think this movie really, like you said, is a masterclass on horror and social anxieties for our own moment. And so it was fun.
So we get to talk about the now for once, right?
Exactly. We're not just old dudes. And I feel relevant now. I'm talking about a 2025 film.
Yeah, and so there's a few more things to talk about, like Kreger's trajectory and putting this film together. He talked a little bit about his writing process too, which is pretty cool. So the idea of being a comedy writer, he said well, I'd spent a decade of reps of coming up with sketch ideas and figuring out how far can I push things, and he said maybe there's something to that with the context of horror. And so, but he also spent some time describing how he actually is inspired quite a bit by David Lynch's process that he described in David Lynch's book, Catching the Big Fish. It's transcendental meditation, but that you involve in your writing process to push your brain's ability to go into creative spaces. And I fucking love that, because it's but you can see in this film, there's some really out there decisions that Kreger himself says is I don't know why I did that, but it seems to work. I really, I love that.
I tell you, I do like that too. And I like the fact that, as I was, listening to the podcast, the last podcast on the left, right? To play on Crest Craven is the last house on the left, which I thought was funny given our 70s stuff. But the thing with the meditation that was interesting to me is I'm out here in Portland. I've been on a family trip for 2 weeks. It's been a great family trip. And in fact, the whole family and our friends went to see Weapons a second time in Portland.
All right.
Before this. So it was like, I've seen it twice in the theaters, and it was playing in like 3 movie houses here in Portland, packed. Really interesting. Like, it's kind of a phenomenon of a movie experience right now.
Yeah,
right.
I agree.
It's taking like, and probably not since a film like Pulp Fiction, which I think has a lot in common with this film in odd ways.
I was thinking, we'll get back to that. I was just thinking of No Country for Old Men, but you go ahead.
There is that, but no, Pulp Fiction is just because of the way in which it's seen from different perspectives.
Yeah, of course.
Times.
Of course. Yeah,
and I love the way he uses that. And I haven't seen it used as well since probably Tarantino did it.
I agree. That is absolutely true. Like, we're going to get into this. There are the chapters of this film and the perspectives and how it does the classic, like stepping back in time and then catching us up again. And, I really appreciate that storytelling methodology, because creating point of view is so hard in storytelling in general. And to do that with these characters was kind of, I think, part of the revelation of this movie.
Totally. For me, absolutely. And it's like a Swiss clock, because it all starts to come together and the story starts to pick up pace, and you could see it all kind of converge into this one place. Just brilliant. And he talks through this process that he didn't even know, at the point he was like, where the kids went, or if there was someone called Gladys, which is the kind of, figure in this movie, spoiler alert. But that was what came through his kind of process, his creative writing process, meditation. My long point being, I'm out here in Portland, and, my host, Zach, who's been amazing, is going through meditation right now. Like, he's doing meditation. He's talking about what it means to get to that space, or try to. And so, like, I'm coming off of this after hearing Kreger and talking to Zach, like, maybe I need to meditate. Maybe that's my problem.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's start meditating just right during our podcast, because we need to get to a new place with our podcast, I think.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, I mean, Kreger is a bit of a phenom too, like with Barbarians, which came out in 2022, was this breakout hit. And, this film, there was like a bidding war for this film based on the script. And so it was justifiably so. I mean, my goodness. And it's funny too, because this film was basically, the entire cast was recasted, because when this film was first cast, the actor strike hit. And with movie stars and whatnot, like their schedules, they're out. Like, they'll be in because of a window and then they're out. And so, interestingly enough, like, Josh Brolin's character was supposed to be Pedro Pascal. This Norwegian actress was supposed to be Julia Garner's role. This woman named Renate Renziv. I don't know if that's right. And even the Benedict Wong character was supposed to be played by Brian Tyree Henry, who is, what's the Brad Pitt movie, the train movie? Did you see that? He was one of the, he was the Tangerine. He was fucking awesome. He was the breakout character of that film. And so there were basically the entire cast. And then the great thing is that Amy Madigan, our Field of Dreams wife, who stands up against the man,
Uncle Buck.
Yeah. She was incredible. Oh my gosh, we're gonna get to her. And so it was a really unique production. And interesting enough, Kreger in some interview somewhere basically talked about how Amy Madigan, from his perspective, saved the movie. And I kind of can see that. There's two, and we can start to get into this. So this film is shot in the suburbs of Atlanta, basically. Yeah. And it's very much about suburban life, but it's immediately introduced through the perspective of a 5th grade girl doing voiceover. And my goodness, this film has an incredible hook. This hook is out of this world, where, we're seeing normal life, but at the same time, she's immediately saying, I want to read some of these quotes. It's we're immediately disarmed by this voiceover. And she's like, we're talking about a true story, and we get this kind of the idea of the true crime narrative is immediately on the table. And she's saying a lot of people died in really weird ways. And again, 5th grade girl 10-year-old girl doing a narration here who we never meet. And then she says it's her school where things went awry. And she describes, I'll read some of it. Today was different. Today, none of her kids. And so this is the teacher, Justine. She walks into her classroom and only one boy is there, and it's Alex Lily. And she says, the reason is at 2:17, the night before, every other kid woke up, got out of bed, walked downstairs, opened the front door, walked across the front yard and into the dark, and they never came back.
Da-na-na. And I think like, so you're right. You guess
so that's the narrative, but what's the visual hook that goes with it of these kids?
Oh, for me, I don't know if they're the same. And it's funny because we haven't really debriefed about this movie. I saw your notes in our notes and I'm like, oh my gosh, like we had clicked as soon as that voiceover started.
Yeah.
And then I saw all the flowers in front of, that brick elementary school.
Yeah.
That's iconic. If you've lived in America for the last 20 years and have seen, I'm sorry, but school shooting after school shooting,
right.
Like immediately the tragedy is clear. And I didn't know, obviously, that there's some supernatural piece to this, but there's a real, like a reality undergirding it that everyone in the U.S. culture, based on the media and based on what we've seen with Virginia Tech to Sandy Hook to Uvalde, like these images are real. Right. And he's playing on them really well in that he's alluding to them, but the story is going to take you other places. But from that first moment, I couldn't stop thinking like, obviously this guy is using this supernatural story to really start to think about how insane this kind of expectation we have for these school shootings, not doing anything about guns, like just basically allowing our children to be fodder. And then there's all other things that can go with that. But as soon as the movie started, I was hooked.
Right. And so there's the other hook that I was talking about is the pose that the girls, so the kids, as they run away, are with their arms stretched out, like kind of like they're flying, but birds. But Kreger talks about that. This is actually inspired by the Napalm Girl photo, the most famous photo from the Vietnam War, probably, of the naked, 10-year-old girl who's escaping a firebombed village. And he himself described it. It's the worst image I've ever seen, right?
Yeah.
This trauma to a child, revealed in her nakedness, but that posture, if you know this photo, the posture, you would make the connection immediately. But you're right, like this, the hook, the other hook is, like you said, like they're gone. There's 17 children gone.
Yeah.
And what can the parents do? And suddenly a month has passed, like, oh, they must be dealing. The police can't figure it out. And that's that idea. It's like, so the police can't figure out where the 17 kids are. The town can't figure it out. And this little narrator is saying like, and they never get it right. And what I'm going to tell you, if you talk to anybody in this community, they'd say this is what happened. But the police and the higher ups will say that never happened. There's a cover up at the same time. And this idea of like with shootings, that you're talking about is there's always this desire, like who's responsible? How can we fix this? And, there's scapegoating. There's the poor like cop who was probably terrified out of their fucking mind, didn't run in fast enough. Right. And so there's the scapegoating of police in some of these situations, or there's the scapegoating of the parents of the shooter. And the idea of a bullied child becomes a character like Alex, who's the one boy who, was in the classroom. We see he was previously being bullied. And so there's that kind of connection that, the bullied, ignored child who comes back and shoots their classmates, even though that isn't what literally happens here. But we're seeing these loose, kind of connections or just pointers to this idea.
Yeah, it's like it's woven into the fabric of a completely different horror story, but it's all there. And like it opens up. I mean, the beautiful thing about this movie is just allows your mind to run wild.
Yeah.
Because, he's not spoon feeding you, right? He's kind of got his own thing going on with these characters and these different perspectives. And I haven't seen a film in a long time between the voiceover and when we start Justine's narrative, her at the assembly, where the parents are looking for answers. And it's kind of like a community, like, grief session, if you will.
Right.
And like, as soon as you step into that and you realize that the parents want answers, not just from the school, but from the particular teacher in whose class this happened, like immediately the movie's off and running and doesn't really stop for 2 hours. It is just really brilliant narrative.
Yeah. And there's all these connections to the now too. Like in that PTA meeting, there's like the superintendent. It's not the principal, because we learned later that Benedict Wong is the principal. And he's speaking about like, we have to allow feelings that involve anger because we've endured, some trauma. And this whole idea of like public trauma, right, is such a thing, like using social media as this way of putting our trauma out there, which in some ways people say it's like, oh, this is good. People are being vulnerable. But at the same time, is it too much? Are you compelling people to try to care for you? In this idea of self-care through public displays of trauma and saying like, help me, need me, I need you to need me. And just that language being there was so interesting to me.
Yeah. And then, obviously the Brolin character who comes up and, you see this scene again from another perspective, which is such a brilliant part of him piecing it all together. But you just get this sense of frustration. We're tired of the kind of, blah, blah, blah. This is that. Deal with your feelings, rather than a kind of a real question mark about 17 kids from one class disappearing and no one has an idea.
Right.
And it's kind of an absurd premise at the same time as it's a reference to real communities dealing with real grief and real horror of disappearing and even murdering of these people. And so that really sets you up brilliantly for what's about to come. And then you follow Justine's narrative. And then you start to realize, as soon as they say Justine with the comment, that this is just one of many points of view we're going to get throughout this movie.
Yeah, well, you don't even know that at first, though. But I guess I'm not that smart. I was like, oh, Justine, okay, whatever. And so Justine, it's important that we, what's kind of interesting is like, I think this is the first, other than like Vernon, from Breakfast Club, this is our first like teacher or person in the school community that is part of our Family Pictures podcast. Like, and that's important. Like, I think one of the things I used to say that I think is so interesting, if you think about your life as a student in the public school system, and engaging teachers and administrators, even more rarely, but teachers, and how big a part of your life they are, and how effectively this is the only time in your life when you actively engage someone that is a public servant on a daily basis, right? And your parents do too. So this is, we don't think of it that way. Normally we just say, oh, teachers are teachers, schools are school, but they're technically public servants. They're they work for the town if it's public school. And they're trying to cover for her or help her, like Justine, this school administrator, plus the Benedict Wong character. We should start giving his name. That's Marcus, who's the principal.
Who's the best?
He's the best. Actually, we're going to get into James. I actually love James.
There are so many good characters. Yeah. I can imagine the Oscars being like, is it this character from this film or this character from this film that's going to win Best Supporting Actor?
Yeah,
it would be hard to choose.
And so Justine in this meeting is talking about, she is not unlike what you think of teachers. It's like, they're loving. They're like, I love your children. I want them. And, though there is this wonderful moment later on in the film where I loved her in the classroom going after one of the bullies that kind of goes after Alex, who, this is before the incident where the 17 children disappear. And it's like, oh, that's a good teacher. She doesn't fucking mess around. Like when he busted her. I mean, she busted him, like, throwing a pencil at him, and he's trying to say like, no, it wasn't on purpose. And she's like, get outside now.
Exactly. And that was Archer's son, which is such a beautiful detail.
Right.
Like, so you start to see, like,
that was Matthew, right? Yeah.
A tight woven community. And
sure,
he doesn't back down from like, that kid's not perfect, because not all the kids were angels that are in that, wherever they've gone. But the other thing I really like about the teacher's character, and I think, this played brilliantly, and Julia Garner, I think, played Silver Surfer in Fantastic Four, which was just a terrible movie.
Oh, her real claim to fame is what is the TV series with Bateman, Ozarks. She was incredible in that. Yeah,
gotcha.
That's her Yeah, she's phenomenal from Ozarks. I didn't watch that series completely, but I remember watching probably like a half a dozen episodes from the first season, and she was a standout by far.
And here too, like, so she's kind of meek, she's talking to them, and you get the sense that here's his teacher. But then she follows up with that, like she goes to the liquor store.
Yeah.
She got, doubles up, people are at her door soon, and she's like, what the fuck? Which everyone says in this movie at some point, which I just love. It's
the quote.
Like, she becomes this really like complex, deep, refreshing character.
Yeah.
Very quickly, as I think most of them do. And I think that also attention to detail of her character, of a teacher, both as a loving teacher, and she could be both. She could be a loving teacher, but as Marcus reminded us, she had problems at her last school, right? She's having relationships with other teachers. Like, she's a bit of a discipline case.
With the local cop who's in a committed relationship, who's an ex-boyfriend, and he's an alcoholic, and she's trying to get him to relapse with her, and it's just, she's a real human being that has her own, issues. But and it's really great because she and Archer, Archer we learn through Archer's narrative that he's the one who stalked her and graffitied her car with the, witch. And, Archer, if we segue into Archer, who is character number 2, chapter number 2, Archer's this kind of avatar of the American dad, right? I think we first meet him waking up in his kid's bedroom, right? He's been sleeping in Matthew's bed, and that bedroom is so awesome because it's basically so well designed. Like the posters, like there's a Boba Fett poster, and then there's like sports posters.
Fury Road. Because my son is like, check out the Fury Road poster. Because has the same poster.
But because he's a kid, the posters are all so low. He's only 10. He's probably like 4 feet tall, and so there's all this space between the posters and the ceiling. It's like there's such great production design. This is a child's room. It's not like a parent's version of what they think the child's room could be. This is a kid's actual room. It's the parents that let their kid make decisions about how their room could be and whatever they want it to be. And the Archer character, played by Josh Brolin, is trying to like sort through this all by living in his space. It's his way. You get this sense of his coping, and his wife wakes him up and says like, I'm leaving. And they're obviously, unsurprisingly, like, you can imagine how many couples are destroyed by these like loss of a child moments, right? And so Archer then next is presented as despite the stalking of Justine, he's also a contractor. So he's like a classic, like he's a good, hardworking, white and blue collar American man. Right.
Yeah, and it's through him that we start to get introduced to the idea of, here is the surveillance camera. And once he gets out of bed, the thing he does is he studies his son.
Like his Ring camera footage, right?
Yeah, beelining out of the door with his arms out. And then he's trying to, and he's the first one who goes to the police, and we get a sense of, he's like, what the hell are you all doing? Have you investigated the teacher who he thinks is, suspect number 1? And he's pissed off the chief of police. So we get that view of him and the chief of police. But he's the one, I would argue, who's actually trying to figure out something and move beyond his isolated, video screen of this kind of Ring video to reach out to other people to try and get some sense of like, isn't it weird that they were just running over the street in a straight line? Is that the case also with someone else's video? So he starts to do some investigative work, and we start to move some of the narrative forward with Archer. But I just think Josh Brolin, he goes to his job. He's, misordered stuff. He's like,
it's a wrong color paint for the front door of the house.
Which
and he's owning it all. Like, he's like a good guy. He gives the impression, even though he was kind of a bully at the PTA meeting. Like, he's the classic, like, I'm the white dude in charge and I'm going to tell everybody we need to do something and I'm standing up. But he's also this man who's like cowering in his son's like single bed, with his legs probably not fitting off the, hanging off the end because it's too short. And this is how he's coping. Right. And he's not. But he's trying to become a man of action. And it's interesting because Justine also is the person of action as well that we later
exactly.
And but what's important is, like, I think this is a good clue into the beginning of one of the other themes that I thought was really interesting. It's like I titled this one in our notes. It takes a village to ignore abuse, homeless, drug use happening next door in our nice suburban neighborhood. Right?
Totally.
And the first kind of description of that is when he kind of is like, this is, where were they going? Like, let's start with something obvious. We have these video footage. So he tries to go to his neighbor and he confronts this mother who also had a child run out their front door.
And he had a Ring phone, right?
And had a Ring camera. Yeah. And so he's like, hey, can I look at that? And she's like, no. Yeah. And it's this idea, this is that theme of isolation in the now. This is that idea right now of like, how isolated we are as communities now. We don't have to go out in the community anymore. We have our Netflix, so we don't go to the movie theaters. We have our Amazon, so we don't have to go to the grocery store or the Target anymore, or even, like, God forbid, a locally owned like store, like a hardware store or something like that. And then this isolation of the now, of families and communities, I think is really well described in this context. And never mind, like, the toxicity that everybody must be consuming as they get into their social media feeds. And God, can you imagine the social media feeds, which is never portrayed in this movie? And I'm kind of glad they didn't. But can you imagine the quote unquote TikToks and the terrible spaces you would have gone down about this incident of 17 kids missing? There's only one moment, I don't remember which character it is, that hears over the radio, like, and still the 17 kids are missing a month later.
It's with the police officer when he's
when he's in his car. Paul? Or yeah.
And so there is, and the other thing too with Archer, who I enjoyed as a character, once he starts figuring out, so Justine's doing her work and kind of limits it, like, there's a house where Alex is and something's wrong with that house. And then at this point, Archer is coming in and he sees Justine doing her daily things, sees her pull into a gas station towards the end of his episode.
Yeah.
And then he confronts her, right? So, like, we're starting to bring these characters slowly together through each of these, slices of point of view. And you start to realize as soon as probably 15, 20 minutes into the film, which gets you to the second narrative, which is Archer's, that, this is a device that's going to be pulling all of these pieces that we don't understand, because we're completely in the dark about what is happening as well, together brilliantly. So it's part horror, part investigation, right? And then all social critique, if you ask me, in all the right ways. And so really gripping, like, just, in terms of just filmmaking, that's what I was telling to my kids. Like, in terms of just good filmmaking and good story and good acting, like, this film's amazing. Like, it's finally like a relief to go and see something done with so much care and thought. It's like, thank you, right? Well, really, thank you.
And it's a horror movie, because that's also what Jim loves, and so and it's fine. I mean, because and we'll get there. Like, in another Josh Brolin movie, No Country for Old Men, like those characters. That, if you think about that film, like the Anton Segura character, he's like a classic horror villain, right? Except for he uses a bolt gun, and it's because the violence is considered more classical action violence because he's just like a killer for hire, not supernatural, even though you might think of him as supernatural.
He kind of seems it. He's like the judge in Cormac McCarthy, which is another figure from Blood Meridian. It's another figure from Cormac McCarthy, like the one in No Country for Old Men.
Yeah.
But it also makes me think a lot about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre because of the, you know, the technology he is using to kill people, right? You know, so it's a crazy combination.
Yeah.
But Josh Brolin, just great. I
just
agree.
Incredible. And so, you know, there's other things like just to keep in that the idea of, you know, this community and the idea of like, I still think I love that idea of like, it's the inverse of it takes a village. The famous quote from Hillary Clinton. And there's no communication between these families. And despite all the surveillance of their kids, like the tracking of where they are on their iPhones probably, and the ring cams and all the safeguarding lessons that they've received from their teachers and their local police and their parents, they're all fucked. Like this is what would really help is if you actually just talk to one another and spend time with one another. And that the suburbia as isolation is, you know, it's something it's not like we haven't seen this before and other ideas like suburban hell, blah, blah, blah. But this is an of the now version of it. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I do. And I think that, you know, again, he does it, he references it, you see it, but he doesn't have to spoon feed it. No. And like, you're still with those two characters now looking for a solution, because by the time Archer's narrative ends, we're introduced to some craziness that is happening in this town. And it's in the form of Marcus, who we should probably talk a little bit about.
No, it's Paul and James, then Marcus. Oh, yeah. At the end of Archer, we were introduced to Marcus.
We're introduced to Marcus, kind of a very different Marcus.
He basically is zombie Marcus.
He's a zombie Marcus who's trying to kill Justine.
Yeah.
And Archer, who's confronting Justine at the gas tank, is like, what the hell's going on here? He gets his ass kind of kicked by Marcus, but then gets up and he's fighting with Marcus, not realizing what he's fighting with. And Justine is running scared towards the mart. Yeah, and one of the greatest moments of that is when she's running out of the mini mart or whatever, or the gas station, and she's like, why doesn't somebody help me? Right? Like there's this real, and the guy is like, get out of my store. You brought this in.
But that's the second half of the Marcus episode. I think that happens with Marcus, right? So we should put a pin in that for a second, because what's interesting is that that's an advancement that happens in a chapter, like basically 3 chapters later after Archer. So, you know, we had this bizarreness, and this is the beginning of the kind of classical horror elements that are happen. Yeah. They're also introduced in both Justine and Archer's dreams as well.
That's right.
Within their chapters, we see this kind of clownish, kind of Pennywise character. Right. Totally. Stephen King, Pennywise type of character. And so we're like, what the F is that? And that's the horror stuff. And this is where I'm not like turned off by it, because I've spent, 5 films now watching horror. And this is actually so well done. It doesn't have, I'm a science fiction freak, so I can handle like supernatural. So I'm fine with that. But my favorite part is when Josh Brolin, he sees like this kind of creepy character in his dream, and he wakes up in his son's bed, and his person is just like, what the fuck?
There's so a bunch of them. I agree with that. And there's a bunch of the what the fucks around the movie, which I think it's like such a great reaction to what's happening.
And it's such a great reaction, if you think about it, to the entire film. Like this shit shouldn't be happening. We shouldn't be having to deal with this. Like, life is hard enough, man. Like, why the fuck do people have to be such assholes? And I think that's like a good capstone to the falseness of suburbia, or, in like, just, it's this interrogation of the discord in society right now. And like how people are just like, you're not me, I'm not you, I'm not fucking talking to you. Like, and everybody's just like, what the fuck? What's the matter with you? And what's the matter with that? Yeah. Why are you behaving this way?
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's nicely said too, because one of the things that's happening here as we're watching the film unfold is, we're watching two characters try and break out of that, right? And it's kind of the narrative where they're like two people who are opposed to each other, but in the shared experience of a zombie attacking them, start to come together.
Right.
And it's through that, like, we start to see, what's at the root, if you will, of this kind of torn asunder community. Yeah. And that kind of gives you a sense of hope too, because it's never mentioned, like you said, social media, which I think is a nice touch. But we all know that that's the kind of other elephant in the room here, is right. Like, part of that isolation and part of that, bipolar kind of partisanship we're seeing in all parts of the country, really has a lot to do with, us not being able to talk to, deal with people in a different space, a social space. And what could be more social than the school? What could be more social than the services that our next character, Paul, serves, is to protect the community, right? And so that's a kind of, it's interesting the way he's dealing with all this, but I just think I love the fact that he has such a light touch with it, right? Like, it's enough that you don't feel like, oh, okay, here's the major theme that I'm supposed to take away from it, boring. And so, like, I like that. I really like that.
Yeah. Oh, no. My phone is ringing. Well, let's get rid of that.
I can hear it.
Oh, good. Let me turn Do Not Disturb on. So, yeah, it's interesting because now there's these three kind of bridge characters that kind of come across. I don't know if we'll go into detail to every single one. I think we can maybe talk about our highlights for each of them. And they're interesting because we have Paul, who's the local police officer, who's kind of fucked up. And we have James, who's like the drug addict, who I love rewatching this because James is the one who's like panhandling, holding the door open for Justine.
Yeah.
She goes to as she goes into the liquor store. And it's such a classic panhandling kind of maneuver where he's super over the top polite. And he's basically looking for money, and he's lying his ass off. And then finally Marcus, who's the Benedict Wong character, who's the principal. And these three characters, basically, it is part of and so that James moment is part of what you described, this really tightly knit script here, right? It's like James is introduced. When you first watch it, you're like not seeing James so clearly as the guy at the liquor store. It's only when we're really introduced to James through Paul, the police officer who arrests him. And then he gets his own little narrative too.
In fact, other than Gladys, and even argue you can say Gladys, we're introduced to every character in Justine's narrative. And then they just basically slowly flesh out and become real characters. Even Gladys, you see her hair when they're being interrogated by the police. So like, it's all there. It's just a matter of, connecting the dots, if you will, and making sense of this insanity. But Paul is a fun character.
Yeah.
I did like the police character because not only is he cheating on his wife with Justine,
or his fiance, whatever she is. Right.
We'll see. Well, they're trying to have a baby, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Ovulating.
And they're living together. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So whatever the relationship it is, it's a real one, supposedly.
And then he also happens that his wife is the daughter of the chief of police, who's his boss. And so that's a great comic dimension. And so I think it's worth mentioning, like you said, with the what the fuck. Even when he's kind of dealing with his father-in-law, who's kind of standoffish and not really getting his jokes or pretending to get his jokes and just kind of being a jerk to him, like, there's a lot of comedy in this movie too. Yeah. It's actually very funny, and it can balance its horror with its funny. And I think Paul is one of those moments where you get that comedy and it starts to really, like, you're comfortable with it, right? You're kind of getting how this film is playing out. You've seen Marcus as the zombie running at you, so you know shit's going wrong.
Right.
But you're still comfortable again because you're starting fresh with Paul and you're in a new space and you know it's probably going to go bad, but for about 10 or 15 minutes, you know you're good.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I think I love that they pull the trope of like the dickish father. It's like, yeah, I know you're fucking my daughter. So like, I'm not really, really happy about being friends with you because I know you're not the best guy in the world. You work for me. You're not the best cop, clearly. And this dad must know this already. And so he's giving him space to be in his life, but he's not really necessarily happy about it. And that's where I think a lot of that humor comes out of. But Paul also gets his what the fuck moment, which is so great because he is dealing with James. Like he's doing his patrolling. And meanwhile, again, 17 children are missing, but we still have to patrol the community and do everything because it's a month later. And he again and again tells Justine, I don't remember who, I think it's Justine, I'm not a detective. Because Justine, we didn't mention it. And it's not really a big deal, but, Justine had a relationship with Paul, the cop. And she, I think I did mention it. She made him come. He came to the bar, and she's trying to get him to drink again. And we later learn that he actually succumbed to her advances, and he gets drunk, and they have sex. Even though he lies about it initially to his
that's another scene when his partner comes down and is like, "Where were you last night?" He's just like. It was awesome. It was well played.
And he doesn't even lie. He's just like, oh,
yeah, he doesn't. He's just like, I'm done. I just fell off the wagon. Yeah. I had a, illicit affair. I'm screwed.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, but his interaction is he chases down a vagrant, basically. We're just introduced, and he's actually a pretty good, successful cop. The way he drives around the block and maps his trajectory and cuts him off, jumps out of the car and tackles him. And he does all this super polite police work initially. It's like, am I going to be it's like because he cuffs him and it's like, I'm going to search you now. Am I going to be putting my hands in your pockets and getting myself stuck with anything? And he's like, no, sir, no, sir, no, sir. And this is James, that drug addict.
I love he is good.
Yeah. And then immediately he goes into his pocket and he gets stuck by a needle, which is like, and he goes, "What the fuck?"
Exactly. Yes. What the fuck, man?
And he punches him, and he realizes it's on camera. He locks him. He realizes that on camera. Him, and he tries to get away with it by letting him go. And he does the if I ever see you again, I'm coming after you, even though this for now is just a warning, right? And so you have another part of the dysfunctional community is we have the abusive cops here.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah, I mean, that's there with the camera, the whole piece, another brilliant, and you as the cop come to the realization that after you just hit this guy who you're kind of on the side a little bit with the cop because James, he's like, you don't know what's in his pocket. He asks him, he's polite, and he's freaking pissed off, and he's got the camera there. So even that is not unidirectional, bad cop, right? It's a guy who's in a bad situation, with a guy who's a super good liar. James is the best liar. He's like, no, I work here, dude. I was just trying to get in.
Yeah, I totally believed him at first.
Me too.
James is such a great character. And so surprisingly, and it was a surprise that the next chapter was James. And it starts with James. We realize yet another failure of this community. He's living in a homeless tent encampment in the woods. Right.
Yeah.
And he's trying to, smoke crack or whatever the fuck it is. He's cooking something and trying to inhale it. And, we realize, no, this guy's a real fuck up. He's really, really screwed. And, we kind of get cycled through. I think I forgot that the way that, Paul's story as a cop ends is, James is coming to the police station and he's like, what the fuck?
Paul had gone through all the other stuff of basically saying I hit this guy, it's on the camera, telling his father-in-law / boss all the stuff that happened. The father-in-law is like, you're an idiot. I hope this passes over. Otherwise, there's nothing I can do for you. You could have said that he's in a bad situation. He's cheated on his wife. His wife knows what's going on. He's bad. And then he comes out of the police station, and James, who he has warned to stay away, starts walking towards him, and he blows up.
Yeah, but then it switches to James's story, and I find James's story so compelling because we finally actually, there's some other things that have been happening that we're kind of ignoring. Justine has actually tried to track down Alex for a bit, and she confronts Alex on the street, despite Marcus, the principal, saying, Justine, don't, you're stepping over bounds, and she doesn't listen. And it's really interesting because Alex puts her off, which is really surprising. It's like, leave me alone. And he goes into his house, and his house is fucked up. His house, you can see the lawn is overgrown. The windows have newspaper pasted up so you can't see it. And this is where you're just, again, like, what is up with this community? This is the one kid who is left from this classroom, and no one's like, what's going on with this house and this family? And this, again, it's like, I don't care. It's not my kid. And this, like, ignoring what's going on in that home. And that home becomes important because James stumbles into it.
And he sees the newspapers. And so it's like, this is interesting. And to your point, Justine had seen the house earlier, had gone in and actually had seen two figures on the couch. Didn't go in, but had seen two figures. Well, now that James is at the house, he kind of walks in.
Well, he breaks in. He actually climbs up to an upper floor. He's doing a B&E. This is a bad man. He's like trying to rob the house. He sees a house and he's terrible at it. But that's what's so great about it. Like, it's spooky as fuck, but he's high as fuck, so he doesn't care. That is like, I could do a whole movie of that. Can we please do a horror movie where the people are so high they don't care about, like, all the spooky, like, crazy things going on around them? They're like, whoa, but I got shit to do. I got to rob this place.
The greatest moment, and I don't know what the story is behind this, but I love it, is, he's looking through the video equipment, and then he takes out like a DVD or a VHS. I think it's a DVD. Is like, oh, Willow. it's like great. I love it. Willow, like, that's great. I wonder what Craig's relationship to Willow.
Yeah, and it's like a Nintendo or a PS old video game system. He's like, this is shit. He even knows it's too old, that it's not worth anything.
But the other piece with him is, I love it when he's talking to his sister on the phone before he B&E's the house, and he's going around the town just trying to open up car doors. Yeah. And he finds this, young girl's like
iPad,
Hello Kitty iPad.
Yeah,
and he's pulling it through while he's talking to his sister about owing her money. And he pulls out an iPad and he's wearing it as he's sitting in front of the pawn shop, waiting to go in to sell it.
Right. And so
the pawn shop guy wouldn't buy it, which I think is like the one moment of ethics and morality of the community. Like, I know you stole this.
But it doesn't last very long, because he comes right back like 2 hours later with a bunch of silverware, and he's perfectly willing to weigh it and buy it.
It's true. Yeah.
But this is the first inkling of, now, we know the source of where shit's going down. Because despite him being like high and kind of ignoring creepy things, there's this moment right after he's looking at the DVD, he turns around and there's two people on the couch, and he immediately switches to this, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I don't mean, I'm not here. And it's we don't know who these people are yet.
Yeah.
But he goes up to them and he starts like poking at their faces, and they're not doing anything. And so he's just like, oh, well, and then he continues to try to rob the house. And that's what I love about him. It's like, literally, like, it's like, dude, there are two zombified human beings in a house, and you're just like, yeah. And he does another thing where he goes into the basement, and he does the classic, like, that's the trope of any freaking horror movie that I understand. It's like, don't go in the basement, like, because that's where bad things are. And he glimpses down there, and he sees the head of a kid.
Yeah, and that's when we see, and we know at this point, by the fourth story, we know where the kids are. And it starts to really pick up pace here. He goes back, he sees Gladys in the woods, which is so Gladys is now out of dreams, kind of in some sort of reality.
And so remind me, when is Gladys first introduced from the perspective of, is it in Alex's story? Like, we get Alex's parents talking about how Gladys is supposed to come and stuff like that?
It is. It's not until Alex's story. But we get a vision of Gladys from Justine, from Archer, and I don't know if we get one from Paul, but we do get one from James in the woods. So at least three.
Yeah, I don't think we do to the cop. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
and so it's through Marcus, the principal, that we are Gladys is finally revealed as the character, and I kind of don't want to go there yet. I kind of want to go to Alex's, the final one, first in some ways, because I think it makes more sense. So this story, the Alex and Gladys character, is to back all the way up to Craigor. He tells us how that is kind of the origin of this entire film. is this is a story of abuse, of being, an adult abusing, being a child in an abusive home. And he tells the personal story of how he grew up in a house where, and he describes it. It's like he had an alcoholic father, and the specific line, I want to read it directly just so I get it right. And it says, I had a happy house and something came into my house and turned my dad into a scary person. And I'd go to school and everything was cool. And I'd come home and I'd have a scary dad. And so his dad ends up dying of cirrhosis. And so he grew up in this kind of the stress, the real stress of a dysfunctional home. And that's that kind of the beginnings of this. It's not the last thing, but that's part of the community aspect, ignoring abuses in houses. And, Justine tries to help Alex. And so, but the source of this is a crazy aunt who's coming to live with the family.
Yeah. And I like your take, and it's the take that I had too. So as we see Gladys, Gladys is this crazy aunt, and the father is preparing Alex. It's like, hey, buddy. And he's a weird dad. He kind of doesn't fully connect with his son, but he's trying. Yeah. But there's this weirdness between them. He's like, hey, did you get all the girls, big guy? And you can see Alex is obviously, probably the kid is being picked on in the class.
Right.
His father has no idea, and Alex can't communicate it cleanly. But anyway, he says, yeah, your mom's aunt's going to come moving. I know we don't know her, and I know, but, it's family, and we got to do what's right. And then in comes, like, what you said is, like, the boomer invasion, where they don't stop taking, from every generation, even down to Alex. And there's this, like, vampire story in Gladys, where, like, you really feel like this relationship to, the old folks right now in America generationally, where, you just don't feel like, a certain generation, not to be named boomers, won't stop sucking the blood of Gen X and everyone else, below them. Yeah. And I really love that take on this movie as the boomer horror figure.
Yeah. And so, so Gladys initially is just like a creepy aunt, and this is like, well, we got to deal with it. And, there's a conversation that Alex clues into his parents talking in the bathroom, and the his mom is like, I don't know, man. I really wish we didn't have to do this. And he's like, well, I can't see. She's your aunt. We got to do it. It's like, and he tries to play the good guy. And it's like, it's what you or your sister would want, or somebody else would do. And so, but the idea is like, she comes in, and it is that, like, stress of they're going to take up their time and their money and their energy, and she's not going to let go. But it turns into something way more really quickly.
It really does. And, she doesn't stop, and she's really effective. I mean, it's just a great, Gladys will go down, I think, is one of those great.
And this is, by the way, played by Amy Madigan, who is, I already referenced, is the wife of Kevin Costner's character, Field of Dreams. And she's like this feisty, like 60s generation, we're going to take it to the man, and peace, love, rock and roll. And ironically, she's playing the avatar of the parasite on society from that generation that won't let go.
Yeah, it's great. And her makeup is wild. And she's just really good at, like, putting Alex in his place, like realizing, like, there's a new order in this house, I guess, to Kreger's real horror of what happened with his dad. And she just demonstrates, like, if you, tell anyone, if you let this out of the box, this is what I'll do to your parents. And she's obviously got a spell on them, and she can make them do anything she wants, including hurting themselves, or, as she says, eat each other. Like, there's some really horrific moments where you see where Alec ultimately is reacting to Jasmine the way he is, because he's petrified.
Yeah, Justine, right, yeah.
Yeah, Justine, I'm sorry, because the whole world, his world has collapsed into this woman's control over everything about his life, his parents. I mean, he's got nothing, and he can't tell anybody.
Right. And so it's through, this is where and we've already been introduced to this supernatural ritual in the Marcus story, where the poor principal is kind of unwittingly gets taken over, his life and control of his life is taken over by Gladys. And there's this ritual that involves having a piece of that person, whether it's their hair or something they've created or touched. And she wraps it around like a stick and she puts her blood onto it. And it's really cool because Krager talked about in that interview with the last podcast people, it's based on like classic Haitian zombie voodoo magic and stuff like this, right? And you know, because you remember voodoo dolls, it's like, oh, you have this thing of someone, and then you turn the voodoo doll into that person, and you can control them, like you puppet them. And so Gladys showcases her ability to puppet people, including Alex's parents. And so, but that's the idea. It's like that's the metaphor of this generation, is they've been puppeteering everybody below them for so long, they just won't, and no one can quite ever cut the strings.
Yeah, we just can't get rid of the boomers. It's basically the moral of the story.
Well, the moral of the story is the generation alpha is that thing. I think fucking mellow. We'll get to that. That's the best part. Yeah, you're right. Alex is terrified. He's seen his father poke himself in the face with a fork at the call of this creepy aunt. And we now know that Alex is the source of the issue, and there's this thing about, and so now we finally understand where the children and why they left. Like she's literally feeding off like a vampire off of youth. And we don't know if she's literally his aunt or she's like 1,000 years old. We don't know, like a vampire could be, you know, like hundreds of years old and needs to feed off of the youth of others. And so she thought it would be enough to just have Alex's parents. And by the way, Alex has to care for his parents too. Like he has to feed them soup. And that's
one of the worst parts is the soup feeding.
And there's this really great moment of, you know, he's a child. He's never opened a can of soup in his life and he has to figure it out and he's getting no help. And that's part of that story of abuse, of children being forced to fend for themselves. Right. And even though it's through this description of like trying to feed his parents rather than himself, which would be the real situation. And so you're left to recognize in that Alex is really, really getting traumatized, and he's doing what kids that are traumatized do. They hide as much as they can. And he hides from Justine, even though Justine tries to intervene and engage him, and she can't punch through.
No. And ultimately, what does, and so bringing certain narratives together, right? That house, as you said, becomes the epicenter. And we see Gladys and people coming to the house and that kind of working. But I think one of the great...
Justine, not Gladys. You said it again.
What's that?
Gladys coming to the house. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, you see people coming to the house.
Right.
Where Gladys is. But if we go back one story, we get to see and get introduced to Gladys, and we get the story of Marcus. And I think this is one of the funnest stories, if that sounds weird, but it's also like you see Marcus and the character Marcus plays and their gay relationship. Yeah, he's such a compelling character.
With their Steamboat Willie out of copyright Mickey Mouse T-shirts.
And they have these hot dogs and this mustard, which I think is a reference to one of the sketch comedies. That's what Chris Blankenship was telling me. Like, this is a reference to, so there's a whole bunch of references to the other stuff they've done together as a troupe, which if you're in the know, you know. But like that whole moment where Gladys comes in, is invited in like a vampire, and then she gets the bowl and she's like, I'm not going to even explain why I need a bowl. And like,
instead of a glass of water.
That is such a crazy scene.
Yeah.
You know, apart from the insanity of, you know, Marcus killing his partner and all of that happens.
As he's turned into a zombie. Yeah.
But then you start to realize, wait, she's weaponizing these figures to attack one another, which brings us back to the whole moment where Marcus then goes to find Justine, finds Justine. We now see that Justine and Archer are going to team up because they realize what's going on.
Right.
The greatest moment for me in this film, I think, just cinematically, where my kids were like, Dad, shut up, stop screaming, is when Marcus is running and he gets hit by a car. I was like, oh, my kids are like, stop, Dad, stop. But it was just like, even that, like, you know, it's hard to, you know, if you haven't seen it, you should, because it's just a great cinematic experience. See it,
and so And so we're coming to the end here. And what's great is like, we get a sense that it's gonna be Justine and Archer that like save everybody. Like they're gonna solve the problem because they made the connection that because from Archer's map and Justine having visited the house, like that's where Alex lives. And so they go there. And meanwhile, we forgot to mention this, but basically, Paul and James have been zombified or in the house too for other circumstance reasons because, the whole rationale was like James had said, like, I came back to the police station because I saw the kids and I wanted the reward, the $50,000 reward. And so it's like, I'll take you to the house and show you because Paul has been stabbed yet again.
3 or 4 syringes in the cheek.
Yeah,
that's a great
what
scene.
the fuck?
He gets his what the fuck moment.
But it's all coming together in this house, and we think it's going to be. It's having this kind of classic denouement of a horror movie, like the action's going to be the juice in the house, and like Justine and Archer are going to save the day. But in fact, no.
No, it's not that. It's Alex, right? And Alex, having seen, and it's interesting the whole witch piece here because early we get, Justine's car gets witch painted on it by Archer. Mm-hmm. And even though she's not a witch and she's not responsible, and we kind of know that, we do know from the early beginning, like this is a story about a witch. Right. Yeah. And this is a story about a witch who's casting spells on the community, kids on the community, people on the community to weaponize them and, kill each other essentially, or worse, right. Or live off of, or like we said, feed off like the boomers. So this happens. Alex has been privy to this because he's seen her do these rituals.
Right.
And so he had taken a piece of Gladys. And as we have our 2 main characters supposed to solve this, Archer is now kind of under the spell of the witch because he discovers his kids. But in another jump scare, Gladys is down there and comes out of the dark corner, which is a kind of great, it's kind of very Evil Dead or some other great kind of figure because Gladys is kind of like the woman of Evil Dead in the basement. So anyway, Archer's attacking Justine. Alex is upstairs casting a spell. And this time its spell is against Gladys. And he's weaponizing the kids in the basement to go after Gladys.
And so this is this thing where it's like, it's kind of this, there's a lot of multiple catharses happening here, right? We have Alex having a cathartic moment of being able to get some agency over his abuser, which is Gladys, right? And so he's able to be a boy of action, even though you wouldn't think he would be. And he's able to cast this spell on the remaining kids. But then we get the ultimate catharsis where suddenly we have 17 children flying out of the house, and not just through the door, through windows, through anything, through fences, through other houses, hallways, and their windows. And it's just this incredible action set piece. And because the best part is like Gladys instantly knows the spell has been cast because the witch always knows about her own spellcraft. And she starts going, running through houses and backyards. And the kids, like a storm, come after her, which is another comic element. It's incredible. But it's great because I love my favorite Reddit comment I came across is the very end. It's like, those kids really thoughts and prayers the fuck out of you. Because it's the classic, and that's the name we named the episode after this. Like the idea of in these tragedies, in these traumas, the baked boilerplate answer is like, we're sending our thoughts and prayers to that community. And everybody just wants to say, fuck you and your thoughts and prayers. We want change to happen. And it's Generation Alpha who thoughts and prayers this Gladys, because they eventually, there's this great point of view shot of the one girl that's in the lead of the other 16. And she goes right through a window where it's right behind her shoulder. And she cuts off Gladys and tackles her and starts just like beating on her. And the other 16 catch up and they just literally rip her apart.
Yeah, it's like Dawn of the Dead, right? Yeah. It literally like they are ripping her apart, her insides. And one of the people who I saw the movie for, who's really kind of she's a smart woman, and she's kind of like thinking about stuff. And she's like, everyone talks about the gun and what did the gun, like this weapon above in the dream, symbolizes.
Oh, in Archer's, right? Archer's dream.
And she's like, how is that any less crazy what the kids are doing to this guy, to this woman right now? Like where we ask the wrong questions, right? Like we're almost like, oh, what about this gun above the house? What does it symbolize? It's like, how about the fact that these kids are forced to rip this woman apart? And that's all right. And I think it's like, it does kind of suggest how insane it all is, right? Like how insane, to your point, not only thoughts and prayers, but that this level of violence has become something we've kind of, done the calculus on how to live with, despite without changing anything, right? Like, and I think that's what you kind of come away this movie with. Right? And like, what does that gun mean?
I know, and it's more about
it's not clear.
And we can even say it's callousness too, not just violence. Like we're just so willing to live with callousness, and that's that ultimate commentary of the now. Like, we're so attuned to people not taking responsibility for their actions, no matter how bad they are, that everything is like, you can just say, nope, didn't do it, wasn't me, or it's like, I don't care about that person, even though they're my neighbor, or there's someone that has kids in my school as well. It's just not my problem. And that callousness, I think, is the metaphor of this violence. It's like, in that the children, like the generation Alpha, is going to have to, even though they tear apart the boomer eventually, and whether that's just going to be through they are going to finally die off by the time Generation Alpha is adults. Let's hope they're dead. Who knows? There's all these crazy shit of like, I'm going to live forever kind of science people are trying to do. And, but the reality is the damage is there. And we're at a point where the damage being done is starting to become damage that we wonder if we're going to be able to fix. And Generation Alpha, definitely, are they going to be so screwed by the time, they're quote unquote in charge of fixing it? Or are they ever going to be allowed to be in charge? Who knows?
I mean, it's an interesting point. And just on a personal story, my kids go to school and have been going to school since my oldest was 10, my youngest was 5, in Italy. And like, it's always interesting to say, okay, what does Italian culture study about America now? Like, what do they think about America when they talk about it in the schools? And it's, very specific, Italy, looking abroad at various places. But my kids come home and like the things they learned about America in school was like school shootings. Right. Like this is one of the things like they study and talk about in class. And that gives you a sense just internationally. And obviously you always have a myopic view of another culture when you're outside of it. But it's just interesting that my kids, understanding the culture that I'm from, talk to me about school shootings and how afraid they are to go there because of that. And there's a crazy sense of, how hard is that also to see when you're within it? And like, I like that. What I always love about horror movies is they're always able to kind of, those good people who can tell these stories and who can do a critique and who can do it well, can look at that culture and say, look how fucking insane it all is. Let's tell a story that kind of lays it out. And this is one of the best stories I've seen that did just that. And that's why I loved it so much. Like I came away from this movie, I wanted to see it again. I talked to you. I'm like, we got to talk about it. Not that I necessarily have anything much more insightful than anyone else has ever seen, but I am just like, this is awesome. This is good filmmaking. And it actually hopefully has some people reflect upon what a shit show America is right now when it comes to things like this, and how can it not deal with it? Like, and maybe that's not what he's trying to do. Like, that's not necessarily his, flag in the sand or line in the sand, but sure as hell when I watch it, I'm like,
or a line of salt on the ground, on that hallway.
A line of salt in the hallway. Don't step over that.
Well,
you'll have 2 Jack Nicholsons coming after you in that bathroom.
Yeah. Well, this has been the Emergency 2025 addendum to the Hot Summer 70s Horror Family Classic Family Podcast, Family Pictures Podcast episode. So I thank everybody for joining us, and there'll be more soon. We might hit another 2025 film.
Oh, I would like that. That's fun. All right.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.